Good evening to the August 3rd Economic Development Council meeting. Before we go around the room and introduce ourselves, we'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening. Steve, would you introduce yourself?
Steve Langley.
Derek Horn.
This fine young lady's just joining us, so we'll let her introduce herself when she sits down.
Joanne Duffy.
Charlie Tentis, Chairman.
Andrew Carteret, Vice Chair.
Peter Georgiantis, Selectman's Rep.
Excellent. Eric, are you ready?
Okay, the first item you have acceptance and corrections of the minutes of the previous meeting from July 13th. I sent those out by email, and you have a printed copy on the table in front of you this evening.
Any questions on the meeting minutes? Make a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Abstain.
Abstaining.
All right, for old business, we've been reviewing the master plan at the planning board's request, focusing on Appendix B, economic development. The last meeting, I provided a draft memo that was distributed, and then modified it based on the discussion at the July 13th meeting, and I emailed this out to everyone, and then this is basically the draft memo I'd like to provide to the planning board as the EDC's recommendation on Appendix B, economic development, but also the master plan in general.
So we did make an adjustment on number 3 and we added number 4.
Yes, I think we added number 3. And we bumped down what was previous the 3 down to 4.
Number 4.
And then we also modified number 1 a bit, where we talked about recruiting community leaders. So I tried to capture everything that we discussed in those
Number
meetings.
3. Any discussion?
I'd like to ask a question. So this is our recommendations, I just want to make sure I understand. This is our recommendations to the planning board for areas of focus for them with regards to Appendix B. And we definitely should be reviewing that, though, once they get that to a draft state. Is that something that we need to request, or is that something that they would automatically say, oh, we've taken your recommendations, we've drafted this, here, you guys, review this?
I think if you'd like, we could add a statement at the end that the EDC looks forward to participating in the process and reviewing any draft documents that come out of their review, and put something to that.
Okay, I'm sorry I didn't email that sooner. I was
That's
just, when
no,
I was
that's
looking at
fine.
this, it suddenly dawned on me, is this our only chance to comment on it? And we should.
No, I don't think it is, but it isn't specifically stated in here that that would be your preference.
It'd be nice to have that.
Yep.
Would that be to review the final draft? I mean, it could be draft after draft.
Yeah, I would want to review
Yeah.
the final draft,
Final.
right,
Make it
or when they
final
feel
draft,
they need input.
Because you're right, if there's multiple draft, we don't need to
Yeah.
bog down that whole system. No, I agree.
Okay, review final draft and provide further input as requested by the planning board, something to that,
If
or-
needed.
if needed.
If needed.
That's
Okay.
good.
Because as you had stated, I think last month, this isn't a full-blown one, master plan work, like with an outside group. They're doing this internally.
Well, they did have an item in CIP for some funds for a consultant, but it was limited. It was limited when compared to the amount of funds that were spent in 2004 through 2006 when they did it then.
Okay.
So, but they do have funds in CIP, which will now go in the budget process for the selectmen to consider.
And then the next step is you'll forward this.
I think it'd be appropriate for us to vote on this tonight as the EDC's recommendation, and what I can do is I will put the date on it and give this to John tomorrow. I've already given John O'Rourke a heads up that it's coming for correspondence for the meeting that they have scheduled next week.
Okay. We need a motion for a vote.
I'll, unless there's other discussion, I'll have a motion.
Any other discussion? Okay.
Make a motion to submit this to the Goffstown Planning Board with that add to it that we request that we get to review any final drafts
Yep.
or assist if needed.
Yep.
Second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. So I'll give this to John tomorrow, and I'll go to the planning board at their meeting next Thursday.
Thank you.
The next two items we've been working on are the EdSat recommendations. The first being the site plan application process. We had talked about a two-sided informational sheet, the front, which shows the steps of the site plan process and describes those, and then on the rear is a site plan application checklist that could be used by planning staff, and talks about, I tried to capture everything that's required on the application with indication of whether it's required, not applicable, and any notes that may come of the discussion. So that is, the reverse is new to you this evening, but the front, the only comments I received back was just to change staff to town staff. And I removed a step number out of a continued application because it was a little bit confusing on how that.
I have a couple of comments. I talked to Derek about this earlier. For some reason, they have, and I know it's the way it's done now, because you had said this is the way the planning board does it, but for some reason, the applicant, the first step is that the applicant submits their formal application, which I'm assuming means the final plans and all of that. And then they go to technical review. And to me, that's backwards, because, and maybe Steve could chime in on this, because you really want them to get the staff's comments and the utilities before you spend all that money on finalizing your plans, because every time you have to make a change, it costs money.
Right, I think you want the direction from technical review before you.
And I know that you had said, we weren't going to mess with the planning board's way, but maybe if we could make a recommendation.
Make a recommendation. I mean, we do provide the ability for, as an optional, people can come before technical review. We had a meeting this week where we had two applicants come and ask questions before they submitted for approval.
So it's not a requirement?
It's not a requirement. There are some towns that do require it. Goffstown does not. You can come in with an application and submit it right away. I think in the development regulations, it advises that those options are available and suggests them, but it is not required.
I think we go to technical review before we do formal application, so.
So,
I could put it in as an optional step,
okay.
just even before step one, just optional step, meet with technical review to discuss plan.
Okay.
Could you just do it as option or step one as the technical review before and then put optional?
What's
That's not
that?
really necessary. Make that step one.
Make that step one?
I'm just saying,
And
if you
put it
made it
optional.
step
Yeah.
one and make this
Optional.
noted as
Yeah.
optional.
Right, you
Yeah.
don't have to do it.
Right, and then, that way,
Yeah.
nobody's gonna say, well, I didn't know I could do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
If it's step one, it's there.
That
You're
makes
giving
sense.
them that option.
So then step one would be that, step two technically, and step one currently would be two? We'd
Yeah, I
flip
think you
them.
would flip those.
We'd
two.
flip those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then it says under 2, in bold, notice to abutters and general public. What is that there for? Is that pertaining to the technical review?
I think it was to show that those two processes are started at the same time. Usually when you have submitted a completed application, you go to your technical review to provide comments to the planning board at the same time
Yeah, okay,
a butter notice is going out.
okay.
So I don't know that
Can I ask, if we flip 1 and 2, would that notice to abutters then go with applicant submits formal application, or should it stay in that?
no, it would stay there. It would stay immediately before
Okay.
step 3.
But we're gonna, are we flipping 1 and 2? Is that what we've
But
decided?
it wouldn't go with, it would stay where it was, so if you flipped it,
Yes.
it doesn't pertain to technical review.
Exactly,
Yeah,
yeah,
okay.
I
That was
don't
my
think,
question.
yeah, I don't think it's, so I would pull that out of the notice of abutters, but, you know,
Step 2A or something. yeah.
Yep.
And then I had another question under step 3 where it says waivers relative to acceptance requirements. I don't know if they still do this, but when I was on the planning board, they always used to make a waiver to, the way they did it was, waiver to grant, how was it? Waiver to grant, no, not waiver.
They
to grant-
granted all-
Motion to grant the waiver for purposes of completeness.
They still
Which
do that.
Makes no sense at all. And then they would never go back to it. So that, I don't know if they still do
They
this, I
still
haven't
do
watched the
that.
planning board
They do,
meeting in
yeah.
years, but, so there'd be a waiver in front of them, but they would never act on it. They just automatically go and start the process. And I think the way it should be is if you have a checklist and one of the items is the waivers, as long as they've submitted the application for the waiver, then they're complete, because it doesn't have to be acted on, it just has to be submitted. Just like the state permits and things like that, they don't have the state permits until, later in the
But
process.
they do have to act on the waivers.
Well, they do, but the way they do it now, they always waive the waivers for completeness, and
Oh, and then they go back and
it should just be a checklist
they
item.
do the waivers
And if-
when they're
As
when
part
the-
of the
as part
public hearing.
of the public hearing.
Yeah.
part of the public
It
hearing.
shouldn't
And
be like a separate thing that they do, waive for completeness, because there's a lot of other things that,
That
I
don't
don't know,
get waived.
to me, it just makes no sense at all. And then when I was on the board, I remember a lot of times, things were sloppier back then, but a lot of times they never actually addressed the waiver, because now they were into the hearing itself. So, to me, it makes more sense to just have them provide a waiver form as part of their completeness process, and if the form is there, it's one of the checklist items that they don't actually have to.
But the board has to act on the waivers.
They do, but they do that at the public hearing. Because the butters can comment on the
Right.
waivers, so that can't be done until the public hearing is held.
So you're saying that
I'm saying as long as they get their paperwork in and they've submitted the waiver request, it's just another item on the checklist. And then John would just say, yep, they're complete, because they've completed the checklist.
and they've included the waivers in that checklist.
Right, so
The request for a waiver.
I haven't looked at the checklist in a long time either, but I think there's boxes that you check off.
there are, yeah.
And one of them, if you don't check yes or no, then you just put next to it waiver, and it has to be in writing, obviously.
Mhm.
But I don't know, that was just something that bugged me for 18 years while I sat there. I just think it's silly.
It sounds confusing.
So are you
Yeah,
saying
it
that
is
we should
confusing.
take that out of this? Waivers
Well-
relative to acceptance requirements? In step 3?
I think it's a little confusing in there if we just struck that sentence out.
Okay.
That's not necessarily a level of detail that you need in this, because
Okay.
this is mostly gonna be for people
Right.
coming in at the initial
Yeah,
phase.
And this is a guide,
Yes.
yeah.
roadmap, versus when they're in there, they can get the details when they're talking.
Right, in the application.
It is on the application, it is, and it talks about if you're not going to submit a traffic study, you need to
Right.
check off waiver
Right.
requested.
And sometimes they don't know, they haven't determined if there's a traffic study
Exactly.
until they get further into it,
Yep.
so.
Should it be moved to step 4, or some mention of it in step 4? planning board reviews waivers, or is that just, I mean, I'm just asking.
I don't think so. I think
No,
it's
I
part of
think,
everything
it's just
else.
part of the app, they're reviewing, it's just a part of the application, and it might be one of those levels of detail that
Okay,
isn't necessary in
I would
this
agree with
guide.
that.
cool. Less is
So if anything, it'll cause more confusion here.
Right.
Where
Yeah.
they can get the detailed explanation when they're
When they
in.
fill their
When
application.
they're bringing in
out.
the
And they
application,
meet
and,
with you guys.
yeah, whether they're talking
Their
to John
engineer
or
usually will
Patty.
give them direction on that.
Yeah,
If
The engineer's the one that's gonna tell them that they need a waiver.
It eliminates confusion.
Yeah.
And when you were mentioning that, I got totally confused, so I think that's a good idea.
And then I just had two more things on the next page. So are these items that are here as a checklist from the actual checklist
from the application,
itself?
yeah.
So these are just things that may be needed.
These are maybe
Okay,
needed, yes, yep,
Okay, that's was my question.
yep.
That's the reason for the NA, not applicable, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And again, it would be the idea of John's at the counter where somebody is, okay, you're gonna need this, 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 and this, not, you won't need this.
Any other comment? So in review, step 2 becomes step 1. Step 1 becomes step 2. Notice to abutters and general public becomes step 2A.
Yep,
And we're eliminating waivers relative to acceptance requirements in step 3.
yes.
Anything else?
Can I just want to, I mean, Steve was, when we were reviewing this last time, we were waiting for your input. I
I know, and I
mean, you
wasn't
do
here.
this.
I haven't been here for 2 meetings, but I looked at this before the meeting, and I thought it looked pretty good. And the points that Joanne has made makes sense to me. I was a little confused about that 1 and 2 when I was looking at it earlier, and I think it does make sense to do exactly what you said. Flip those and say that step 2 is optional,
Okay.
which is now step 1.
And you go through the process, so if anyone's going to know, it's you.
Should you put optional but recommended? I mean,
That's
would you,
probably a good idea.
would you
because I
want more
would
people to
recommend
do it?
Yes. You're way better off doing it.
Or I hate to add words, but, optional, people are like, oh, I don't want to do that, but it's so important.
Right.
Yep,
And it's an opportunity that if people don't take advantage of.
yeah, because I think we've identified a lot of issues
Right.
for people, especially when because you change one thing for fire, you're gonna affect something else for
Right.
somebody else.
You don't want
and-
them to find it out
Yeah.
on step 4.
Yep,
And we're
it's-
not, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
And we're not changing anything so that the regs don't have to be changed.
no, this is just a guide trying to reflect our current process. A one-pager for somebody who comes in and says, I'm looking at this property, this is what I want to do, that they can hand it to them and just say, this is what our process is, and, go over the checklist on the back and write down some notes. No, this is not, the goal of this is not to change anything we're doing.
The only thing I was going to mention is by stating that optional but recommended, some of the meetings that we had on those 101 sessions that came up where certain things get, what do you mean? I didn't know that. Well, nobody told me, and now I'm wondering. I think if we put that, it's like,
Yep.
Yeah.
yep, we recommend you do that.
And I think that's what it says in the development regulations. It says it recommends a pre-application meeting.
I mean, I hate to get too legal, but you could even have them check it, or sign it or something like, I'm waiving my right to this, so that when they get halfway through and there's a problem, you can say, well, you,
I think it'll be brought to their attention. They didn't do it.
So these can be quick changes you can.
Yes, yep. And then the only other thing is, when I sent this to Barbara Griffin, she suggested we do one for conceptual review process. And the application for conceptual review you have before you, it's a one-page document. The application is one page, and then it has the review process, and it has a submittal checklist. So I believe we already have this in place. It's a little bit different format than what we currently have, but I think this, doing a separate,
so this exists right now.
this exists right now and is being used right now by the,
And she wasn't aware of it?
She was aware of it, but I don't know if she was thinking it was the same format. Usually, the planning board, when the planning board sees it, they focus on the application part, not necessarily the attached process or anything like that.
And all 4 pages of this document are currently in use.
Yes. Yep.
So again, this could be something that could be handed to that individual when they come in.
Exactly. Yep.
Gone over so they understand.
That's if they decide they want a conceptual.
Yeah,
review.
not everybody
Not
does.
everybody does.
Right.
I'm not- okay. But it is there as that tool's needed to share with them. Okay. With this guide that we're doing, it'd be kind of interesting too, and we can decide. Is this something we should even send it to Barry Bluestone? Say, here's what we're trying to accomplish.
We could, I think we talked, I think somebody, I don't know if it
I
was you
think we
last
may have
one.
mentioned it, yeah.
Yep.
That, you know, if he came up and put that whole piece together, and it's one of the things they highly recommend,
Yep.
plus the fact I'm sure he'd be pleased to see that we're making some inroads with
Yep.
what his recommendations were.
Yep.
And he may even give us some more good feedback.
I think that's it for the process handout and checklist. The next item that we'd been working on, or at least discussing from the EDSAT recommendations, was an economic development strategy. The last meeting, we quickly went through, and I've got some extra copies if you'd like, of the New Hampshire Economic Development Strategic Plan for fiscal year 2016 through 17. But other than doing a brief review of that, I think what we would want to do, we asked Selectman Lemay to bring back to the Board of Selectmen the question on whether or not the subcommittee had been formed for the strategic plan, because I think that was one of the goals. And then we would just need to talk about what the strategy for developing this strategy would be, what's the most appropriate. So,
Mark had mentioned, I think, to me, but I don't,
okay.
I mean, you would know if I don't think we formed any kind
No,
of
I-
board yet.
No,
you
we
know.
haven't heard anything yet.
Yeah.
I know at the all boards meeting, that was brought up, and we're just wondering, as we roll into September and you guys get busy, is that thought of developing that subcommittee
Derek, can you put that on the agenda
Yes.
pretty quick?
for Monday night?
Yep.
And then we'd find an interesting individual here that would be interested in being a part of that committee. And then really start working on it then.
We have a meeting Monday night, and Derek's going to be attending, so put that on the agenda.
I believe that was individuals from all of the different boards involved.
I think there was one from Selectmen, EDC, and Planning Board. Yep.
Perfect.
Yep, okay, then I will put that on the Board of Selectmen's. And again, I have copies of that strategic plan if somebody didn't get it at the last meeting. And the only other item I had is an upcoming meeting next Wednesday night at the Manchester Community College is the open house and public officials / public information meeting on the Phase 2 of I-293 exit 6 and 7. So you have the flyer here, and I also provided you with their summer newsletter that talks about what the group has been doing. They have an open house where they'll have some information out, and you can talk to members of the advisory committee. And then at 7 PM, they'll have a project presentation. And everything, all their meeting notes and meeting minutes from this phase are on their website, which is, let's see, it's on the second page, www.293planningstudy.com.
They're good notes, too. I printed them off from July 21st, and I think May 3rd when they met in May. They're pretty in-depth presentation, if you wanted to look at them. They're pretty good. I know Mark will be there. I don't know if anyone from here can attend. You away on
I
the
think
business
Collis said
trip.
he was going to try to attend, too.
Is he gonna go?
Yeah.
And Adam, he'll probably go from DPW.
I would think that, yeah, either Megan or Adam, yeah, because they are members of the committee.
And in those notes from July and May, you can see that we had good presence at that meeting, those two meetings, in our representatives from Goffstown, so that's good. Anything else?
I don't have anything else.
I have one thing back on the site plan application process. And I don't like to give you things to do, Derek, but I think it's kind of important. On step 5, it says, may approve with conditions. And I think we should look and see how often they they approve a site plan at the first meeting. I think you're giving false hope there, because I've never seen them do that. I just,
How far would you like?
well, that, you know, where you have continue applications is typically when it's recommended for approval. Very rarely have I ever seen on any kind of a major site plan application that they would approve the first, when they accept.
Yeah, we can, I
I
can
mean,
pull.
if you could look through, and if you see that half of them are, well, maybe you'll leave it there, but I think you'll find that very few
Get it the
are
first.
approved at the first meeting.
Okay, I can look at that.
And I don't think you want to, you know, put this out there and people are expecting to get
False
approved.
hopes.
Right,
Right, they get the green light right off the bat.
because it seems no matter how thorough you are, if it's a major site plan
Project.
review, they have some reason to continue it.
So I guess,
'Cause
Steve,
I've tried.
my question to you would be then, because I've never gone through this, if Derek finds that the higher percentage of weren't approved right away and it was continued, how would we rephrase
It
it?
should move to where it says
Just
continue
change,
application.
change positions.
Put where it says continue application, you should put, you know, may approve with conditions
Okay.
at that point.
I think you should switch it. and
Flip-flop
put
'em.
another sentence at the top about, you know, first public hearing or something like that.
Yeah, where it says may approve with conditions, change it to approve application. Yeah, approve
Like
app,
if you.
so you're approving the application, but not,
But if you
that's-
flip both of those columns, just take one, put it to the other,
Yeah,
then it makes more sense, because the first one,
you're likely to,
first public hearing, then
Yep.
continue to a future meeting, then
Yep.
additional information,
okay.
So literally, just flip both total columns.
and then add a sentence.
Yep.
you're gonna take approve application
Put it in the middle.
and switch it with where it says continue application, I don't quite follow
Don't
that.
call it continued,
Okay,
call it,
yeah. It's a
completeness
completeness review.
Review,
Yeah,
Well, the completeness review is step 3. And that's where it talks about, is the application complete or incomplete?
okay, maybe call it public hearing.
yeah.
Yep, and that's under step 4 as their
Okay,
review
so-
of the accepted application, but I can see.
Okay, so I guess maybe I misunderstand this. So is step 3 your first time in?
Step 3 is their first step 3 is they just gotten the application.
Okay.
And usually when John is presenting to them, here's the application, here's a quick overview. They have all the requested waivers, they have all their ZBA approvals, they have all their plans. We don't believe it is application of regional impact, and then they vote on that. And then they typically, at that, unless there's a really big agenda, that's when they typically say, okay, would the applicant please come up,
Right.
present it, and then they hold the public hearing and they'll take input from the
So
public.
that's bringing you into step 4.
Exactly.
Yes, yes, and that's step 4. So the step 4 is really that, step 4 is your first public hearing.
Okay, so are you saying that step 5 is your
It's-
second
It's
hearing?
an action.
It's an action,
It
it's,
comes out of step 4. They can do any one of these.
yeah,
things.
yeah, they can do anything. They basically, it's almost like a decision point.
Mm-hmm.
Would removing the step 5, the actual word step 5, make more sense if you just had
I think so. because that
planning
seems-
board action?
Yeah.
uh,
Planning board action is like part of planning board review,
Right.
except.
It is, yeah, it's, yep,
application.
yep.
Yeah, because it's like you have this flow chart, and then there's an action that may have 3
Right.
outcomes. So how do you message that?
Yep.
You know?
Mm-hmm. That's where I'm
So it's literally
fogged.
step 5 becoming an additional part of step 4? Is that what we're saying?
I think this is right the way they've got it. You get three possibilities here. One, the first one is,
They're going to approve it.
everything's cool. I mean,
Yeah.
even though it doesn't happen that way, Steve, it says these are the options in that.
Right.
And then The second one, continue application, is what you're referring to, Steve, that it never, doesn't seem like that ever happens the first time. So it goes to that second part.
Right.
And then, or it could go all the way over to the end where, it's denied for, not being appropriate or whatever.
So should,
Which is very rare.
Yeah,
should
that's what I'm
step
saying.
5 say, planning board potential actions? Because there's 3 potentials there.
It's action by the planning board. You have 3 different actions.
I think planning board action is correct. I'm just trying to follow, because I always do this by meetings, because every time you have a meeting is time.
costs, yeah.
It's time.
Yeah.
It's weeks apart. So is step 3 is your first time in front of the board.
Step 3 is your first time in front of the board where they're just even deciding, is the application
Complete.
complete where we're gonna start the game clock?
Right.
Is that gonna start the 65-day clock?
And then they usually open the public hearing. At one time.
Usually.
At one time, they used to only accept them for completeness
And then schedule it to a future
schedule it.
meeting?
And I complained about that.
Yeah.
That was an
because
additional step.
It was an additional step and a waste of time. And so recently, they have
They have gone
accept
more,
them for completeness and opened the public hearing
yep,
and heard the applicant.
yep,
And then you would typically get feedback from the board, move on to the next meeting, where that's where you have the potential
Which is continue application?
for the, yes.
yes, they would continue application.
And then at that meeting, you may be approved with conditions. Depending on the complexity of it. When you get into subdivisions and things like that, they'll usually continue on and on, but.
Yeah. No, and this is, but I think maybe just by changing the columns and putting continue application as the first column,
Yeah,
and then approve application, put that in the middle, and then you can almost, you've got that,
I think that makes more sense.
okay.
You agree with that, Joanne?
Yes.
And, it could be that whoever's handing this out may need to say,
Explain it.
these are your steps, and
These are your
and
steps.
when you get done here, these are the 3 actions that could happen as a result of this.
Right.
And
And you may be, if you're not responsive to staff comments or other issues come up, you could be in this loop for
Right.
2 or 3 meetings, or if you're very responsive, we can, do it once and then at the next meeting. So, yeah,
Okay.
I can switch those and make the other changes that were discussed tonight.
And again, it's a roadmap.
Yep.
And then the detail part is when you're talking with them. Good. Anything else? Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
second,
All in favor?
Right.
Aye.
fast meeting.
Thank you. Next meeting?